deep dive today. We're going to be looking at, well, it's an idea that's surprisingly relevant to how our modern world works, division of labor. We're using a really fascinating chapter from Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations as our source material for this. Get ready, because we're talking economics, but it's going to be anything but dry.
What Smith does so brilliantly is he reveals the profound impact of an idea that seems simple, but it impacts everything. From how a single pin is created to, the wealth of entire nations.
And he starts with this really captivating image, a pin factory. He breaks down the process of making a pin into 18 distinct steps. Each of those steps is handled by a worker who specializes in just that one step. And it really paints a vivid picture, of how intricate even making something as simple as a pin can be.
And here's the mind-blowing part. Smith saw that 10 workers in this factory, even if they weren't particularly skilled or even well-equipped, they could produce something like 48,000 pins in a day.
48,000 pins, wow.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how many one person could even make on their own in a day.
Well, Smith estimated that a single person trying to do all 18 steps of the process could maybe make 20 pins, maybe.
That's quite a difference. So why does dividing the labor like this lead to such a huge jump in productivity?
Smith gives 3 reasons. First, there's dexterity. Focusing on just one task leads to mastery. He gives an example. These young boys who specialized in making nails, they could quickly surpass even really experienced smiths who, dabbled in a little bit of everything. It's like that old saying, jack of all trades, master of none.
So by focusing on one thing, you get really good at it. What are the other reasons?
Second is time saving. Think about a weaver in the countryside who also has to take care of their farm. Switching back and forth between tasks, switching tools constantly, it eats up a lot of time. Smith noticed that these weavers, they had to multitask. They kind of developed this less productive mindset, almost like a sauntering way of working because they were constantly shifting gears.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you're always switching tasks, you never really get into a good flow. Okay, so we have dexterity, we have time savings. What's the third reason?
The third reason, and this is one I find particularly insightful, is that focusing on a single task can lead to invention. Smith shares this anecdote about a boy who was working a valve on a steam engine. He wanted to go out and play with his friends, you see. So he rigged up this system that used a string to automate the valve, a simple invention. But it shows how focusing on a specific problem can spark creativity and innovation.
That's a great example. So you don't just get better at what you're doing, you also free up time and energy to think about ways to improve it. I'm guessing Smith doesn't just limit this concept to individual workshops, right?
Oh, absolutely not. He argues that this whole principle of division of labor goes beyond workshops. It extends to entire societies. In advanced nations, you see lots of different trades and specializations, and they all contribute to the nation's overall wealth.
So instead of everyone trying to do everything, people specialize. They become more skilled and more productive in their specific areas.
Exactly. Smith compares this to the difference between what he calls a rude society, where you have one person doing a little bit of everything, versus an improved society, where you have people focusing on specific trades and professions. It's this specialization that drives greater wealth and advancement.
That makes me think about those historical reenactments where you see one blacksmith making everything, from horseshoes to swords. It's fascinating. But it really makes you think about how much more efficient our specialized industries are today.
It is a stark contrast, although Smith does acknowledge that certain fields like agriculture are harder to break down into those specialized tasks, like in manufacturing.
That makes sense. Farming is so dependent on the seasons, the weather. It's hard to imagine a farmer specializing in just one aspect of it all.
Precisely. The very nature of the work limits specialization to a degree. But even within agriculture, we see advancements in technology and techniques that have led to increases in productivity.
So even though it's not as dramatic as the pin factory, the division of labor still plays a role in how agriculture develops. But I have to ask, how does all this specialization, this web of specialization, how does that translate into benefits for people? Does it really improve lives?
To answer that, we need to look at one of Smith's most famous examples, the woolen coat. Imagine a simple woolen coat for a moment. Do you ever think about the journey it took to reach you?
I'll admit, probably not enough.
It starts with the shepherds raising the sheep. Then the shearers, the sorters, the wool combers, the dyers.
Oh, there's more. The weavers, the fullers, the dressers. It's amazing how many steps are involved.
And then you have to consider the merchants and the carriers who transport these materials, sometimes across vast distances.
It's a complex journey, Faith. It gets even more intricate, right? Because even the tools involved, like the shepherd's shears, they require a whole chain of other specialized workers.
Exactly. You need miners to extract the ore, charcoal burners to fuel the furnaces, and smiths to forge the metal. It's incredible to think that something as simple as a pair of shears needs the expertise of so many different people.
It's like this simple woolen coat becomes a powerful symbol of how interconnected our economy really is. It's a testament to the power of this division of labor.
Precisely. And Smith argues that this interconnectedness, this intricate web of specialization, it leads to something remarkable. He calls it universal opulence.
Universal opulence.
Hmm.
That sounds intriguing. I'm ready to hear more about that.
Well, Smith's key argument is that specialization leads to surplus. Each worker is producing more of their specific product than they personally need.
That makes sense. So instead of everyone just scraping by, there's extra to go around.
Exactly. And that surplus is key. It allows for this widespread exchange and trade. And that trade, according to Smith, is what drives economic growth. It raises the standard of living for everyone, even the common artificer or day laborer.
So this universal opulence, it's the result of everyone specializing, producing more, and then trading their surplus, leading to greater wealth for everyone involved.
That's the core idea. But it's important to remember that Smith was writing in the 18th century. His vision was optimistic. But the reality, as we know, is more complex. Inequality and the uneven distribution of wealth are still major challenges today.
That's a really important point. It seems like Smith may have underestimated some of the potential downsides of this system. But before we dive into that,
Actually, I think this is a great place to pause. It's a natural break in Smith's argument, and it leaves us with a really compelling question. How does this concept of universal opulence hold up in the face of modern economic realities?
That's a great point. We've laid the groundwork, we've explored the mechanics of the division of labor, and now we can shift our focus to how these ideas play out in our world today.
Exactly, and I'm sure you have some thoughts on that. Yeah, Smith's vision of universal opulence, it hasn't quite played out like he might have imagined, but his core insight about this division of labor, it's still incredibly powerful and relevant.
So where does Smith's theory maybe fall short? When we think about modern realities, what are some of the downsides to this system that we see today?
One of the big critiques is that hyperspecialization. It can lead to people feeling alienated. You know, when you're focused on the same repetitive task all day, every day, it can start to feel dehumanizing. You lose sight of the bigger picture, the purpose behind the work.
Instead of feeling like a craftsman, like you're creating something meaningful, you become just a cog in a giant machine.
Exactly. And that lack of fulfillment, it can have consequences. Burnout, dissatisfaction with your job, even a sense of meaninglessness. These weren't really issues that Smith had to grapple with in the same way.
It's interesting to think about how work has changed since Smith's time. We have entire industries built around these tasks that are super specialized, but maybe not very fulfilling.
That's right. And there's another challenge, one that Smith maybe didn't fully anticipate. The vulnerability that comes with being so interdependent. He celebrates the fact that we all rely on each other, you know, this vast network of exchange. But what happens when that network breaks down?
Like we saw during the pandemic, right? Supply chains were disrupted, and all of a sudden we couldn't get basic things because some link in the chain was broken, maybe really far away.
Precisely. Or think about the impacts of things like geopolitical conflicts, natural disasters, economic crises. The more specialized and interconnected we become, the more vulnerable we are to those kinds of shocks. It's a trade-off, something we need to think about.
So maximizing efficiency, sometimes that comes at a cost. We need to think about those human and societal impacts of this division of labor, not just the economic benefits.
Absolutely. So then the question becomes, can we benefit from specialization without falling prey to the pitfalls? Can we find a balance?
That's the million-dollar question. How do we strike that balance? What are some potential solutions?
Well, one approach is to focus on creating more, what we call high-skill specializations. Jobs that require creativity, critical thinking, problem-solving. These jobs, they're less likely to be automated, and they offer more intrinsic rewards for the worker.
So instead of just mindlessly repeating tasks, we empower people to use their minds, to contribute in ways that are more meaningful. That sounds promising. How do we actually make that shift?
Well, it requires investment in education and training, to prepare people for these higher skill roles. It's about upskilling the workforce, not just creating more of those low-wage, repetitive jobs.
That makes a lot of sense. It seems like the focus needs to shift from just producing more to producing better, more fulfilling jobs. But what about the vulnerability issue? How can we make our systems more resilient?
That's crucial. We need to think about diversifying supply chains, fostering local production, and reducing our dependence on those single points of failure. We have to acknowledge the risks that come with hyperglobalization and find ways to mitigate them.
So spreading things out a bit, not putting all our eggs in one basket.
Exactly, and that requires international cooperation, strategic planning, and maybe even a bit of relocalization. It's about thinking long-term, building systems that can withstand those shocks.
It's encouraging, to see this growing awareness of these issues. There are more and more conversations about ethical sourcing, sustainable production, the importance of supporting local businesses. It seems like people are really starting to think critically about where their stuff comes from and the impact it has on the world.
That is a positive sign, and ultimately it comes down to values. Do we prioritize endless economic growth, no matter the cost? Or do we try to find something more balanced, a more sustainable and humane approach to production and consumption?
That really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? It's not just about economics. It's about what kind of world we want to live in.
Precisely. And I think Smith, even though he was a champion of free markets, he'd appreciate this nuance. He was a moral philosopher as well as an economist. He believed that economic progress should serve the greater good, not just enrich a select few.
It's interesting to think about his work. It was groundbreaking in its economic insights, but it also lays the foundation for these broader ethical considerations.
Exactly. His theory of division of labor has been so influential, but it's not dogma. It's like a starting point for a much larger discussion about how we want to organize our societies and our economies.
So bringing it back to our listener, what are some key takeaways from all of this?
I think the main takeaway is that the division of labor, it's a powerful force, but it's not a neutral one. It shapes our world in these really profound ways, both positive and negative. And it's up to us, as individuals and as a society, to harness its potential for good while mitigating the harms.
It's about being mindful consumers, asking questions about where our products come from, supporting companies that align with our values, and maybe even thinking about our own career choices, how they fit into this whole complex web of specialization.
That's right. It's about making informed choices, being aware of how interconnected everything is, and using our collective power to create a future where work isn't just about efficiency, but also about meaning, fairness, and well-being.
I love that. We started with a pin factory, and we ended up with this really profound reflection on work and progress. It's amazing how these deep dives can lead us down these unexpected paths.
It's true, and I have a feeling Smith would have loved this conversation. He was so passionate about understanding the world, the systems we create, and the choices that we make.
I think he'd be fascinated by how relevant his ideas still are today, sparking these new questions, challenging us to think critically about the future.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, I have a thought-provoking question for our listener.
I'm all ears.
Think about the last thing you bought. It could be anything. A cup of coffee, a new book, a pair of shoes. Now try to trace back the journey that item took to get to you. How many different people with their specialized skills and knowledge were involved in making it and getting it to you?
That's a great way to bring Smith's ideas to life. It really makes you appreciate that hidden world behind everything we buy.
It does, and it might just make you see that thing you bought, that seemingly simple item, in a whole new light. Because behind every product, every service, there's a world of human effort, ingenuity, and interconnectedness.
It really is mind-boggling when you stop and think about it. So much goes into even the most basic things we take for granted.
And it's a world worth understanding, questioning, and shaping for the better.
It's just incredible to think about how much our world has changed since Smith's time. And yet, his insights about specialization and trade, they're still so relevant. We've gone from pin factories to these global supply chains. But those fundamental principles, they're still there.
It's like he gave us this framework for understanding how interconnected our modern economy is.
Yeah, he really laid the groundwork for so much of our economic thinking. And it's really insightful, I think, how he saw both the potential, the immense potential, and the potential downsides of the system. He saw that division of labor could create so much wealth, but also lead to inequality, alienation, and vulnerability.
Yeah, it's amazing that he saw all that. back in the 18th century. It's like he gave us this roadmap, not just for economic progress, but for how to deal with the ethical and social challenges that come with it.
He's really pushing us to think critically about the choices we make as producers and consumers, to consider the impact our systems have on people, and to try to find a balance between efficiency and well-being. It's a challenge. We're still dealing with it today.
Absolutely. And this conversation, it goes beyond economics. It touches on philosophy, sociology, psychology even.
Right.
How do we create a world where work isn't just about being productive, but about meaning and fulfillment?
That's such a good point. We've been talking about division of labor in terms of how we produce things, goods and services. But what about the division of labor when it comes to knowledge itself? We have all these specialized academic fields, research areas. Has all this specialization led to a kind of fragmentation?
Wow, that's fascinating. It makes me think about how we have so much trouble communicating sometimes between different disciplines, connecting the dots between different fields. Have we become so specialized that we've lost sight of the big picture, the way that knowledge itself is all interconnected?
Yeah, it's like every field has developed its own language, its own way of thinking. Sometimes it feels like we're all speaking different languages,
Yeah.
even though we're trying to understand the same world.
Exactly. And that leads to another question. Does this make it harder to solve those really complex problems? Problems that need people from different fields to work together. Things like climate change, poverty, pandemics. These challenges don't fit neatly into one discipline.
They need us to bring together knowledge from lots of different areas, to collaborate, to think creatively. And if we're all stuck in our own little specialized silos, well, it's a lot harder to do that.
You're right. That's crucial. Maybe we need to be thinking about how to encourage more interdisciplinary thinking, more sharing of ideas across those boundaries. How do we break down the silos and create a more integrated way of creating knowledge and solving problems?
That's something to really think about. It's like we need a whole other deep dive into the division of labor in the world of knowledge.
That's an episode for another day. But it's a great example. It shows how Smith's ideas are still sparking new questions, centuries later, challenging us to think differently.
His work is a reminder. If we want to build a better future, we need to understand the systems we create. And pursuing knowledge, just like the division of labor itself, it's a collaborative thing. We learn from each other, we build on each other's ideas, we work together to build a world that's prosperous and just.
Beautifully said. I think that's a perfect way to wrap things up. It's been so fascinating to explore Adam Smith's work and see how powerful his ideas still are.
It really has. It's given me a lot to think about. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Adam Smith and the division of labor. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.
And remember, the next time you pick up an object, something you bought, take a moment to think about the journey it took to get to you. All the specialized skills, the interconnected networks, all those people who helped create it. It's a testament to how ingenious and interconnected our world really is.
Until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.